Hey everybody, it's Ryan. We're back again with another episode of Small Business Chronicles, and in our series about podcasting, I have Evans Putman here, works in the podcast range. We're going to get into what he does. And once again, if you watch my other ones in the series of podcasting, you'll understand how revolutionary podcasts can be to your business. And so we've went through from having Laura on from All Ears English, the creator of Podmatch. All those people have been on the show. Evans kind of works on the area of how to grow, influence, and work that podcast. How are you doing today, Evans?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Grateful for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Small Business Chronicles has become a Swiss Army knife of information for business owners. And sometimes we hit a vein and we do multiple shows on that topic because you can always approach a topic in multiple ways and you like to hear what people are getting out of that. And whereas you have a person like that runs Podmatch that knows the back end of connecting things. And then you have Laura McMahon that has 8 million downloads on a podcast. They see it from a totally different place. To somebody like me that we started this as a marketing venture and it blew up into a whole entire corporation and business. So tell us a little bit about who you're with and what you do in podcasting.
Absolutely. So I run a company called Infinite Impact Consulting and Coaching. And I've got a couple different things that I do. I've got a membership that I call Podcast Profit School, a other business model that I've run, a virtual event called Podcast Sales Machine. So as you can hear from the two titles there, that sort of lays the seed for what I specialize in, which is mostly growing audiences full of eager buyers, turning those listeners into leads, and then moving those leads through a process that they become a client or a customer. So it's very much like business consulting for podcasting.
That's a very interesting business model. I can see how that would work from sitting in this chair and doing these podcasts. On your business leads, you said that you're converting listeners, or do you convert guests, or is it a mix and combination of both?
It's what we focused on was listeners. We were more one to many. Right. That this all comes from the background of working with a podcast. It was called Real Estate Rock Stars with Pat Hyben. And Pat came to me at the time. I had no idea anything about working with podcasts. I was just an entrepreneur, and we met, and he had a need. I sat down with him. I figured out that we could actually, over a weekend, I was like, give me everything you got, your vision, what you're looking to do. And he sort of shared that with me. And I said, give me the weekend. I'll come back with an entire business for you. And it had the podcast as the core, the engine that drove the business. But at the time, as an entrepreneur, I was just like, yeah. He's like, can you grow the podcast? Can we turn this into a business? And I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, okay, now I got to go figure this out. So that's sort of how I got into this. It was more from, he was the expert, the person behind the mic who did the interviews. And I was tasked with basically like a CMO, a chief marketing officer, and in charge of sales and revenue too. So I just built the model with the podcast as the engine, and we never really strayed from that. That was our prime engine that drove the business. We didn't do any other kind of marketing or anything at all, paid ads, any of that stuff, just the podcast. But to your original question, it was one to many, and we had a different philosophy where and I know some people that do teach that, bringing in your ideal client as a guest and then that sales process. But we looked at our guest as more of JV partners. So we did a lot of collaboration with our guests where we did some, webinars with them. We did events with them. We did cross-selling with them and swapped shows, obviously, with a lot of them as well. So that was really our model. And to be honest with you, 100% transparent. We were just building it as we went because we didn't have a plan in mind, or we didn't have a proven path in front of us. We were sort of with the machete chopping through the vines, making our way and making the
No,
path
I get
ourselves.
bushwhacking your way through it, because kind of what happened with us was we went on the alternate thing where we were bringing on, and we've kind of changed, but that was our model. We brought guests on. The guest, we would go out and find people. We started it. We worked for a full service marketing company, so. We ventured into white label, doing a ton of white label work because we felt that there was a big influx in people wanting white label marketing work for their smaller agencies, where you could turn one small agency into a powerhouse agency just through this white label work and stuff. So we went out and we started doing marketing podcasts, but then we would go on LinkedIn and find marketing guests to bring on, other marketing agencies to bring on. Well, then it started changing, and it just goes to the point of bushwhacking through it. All of a sudden, I'm a business guy, but I'm not a business guy. So I start doing a different type of podcast. Then we get another guy, and all of a sudden we have a podcast network. And then after that, people are reaching out and like, hey, can you produce these podcasts? Can you help us bring our podcast to life? And then within 6 months, we have a podcast production company. So it's amazing. And my point to this is where you start for one reason in podcasting, and I start for one reason. All these people I mentioned before and all these people you see are there's various reasons to flow and to start into podcasting. And when you bushwhack your way through it, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion in my group call today in Podcast Profit School, where I was like, the getting started, just getting in momentum and moving forward, following a little bit of a framework, but movement creates clarity, right? As you move forward and let the market dictate to you what they may be looking for and how you can help them, because we all, business owners, entrepreneurs, we feel like we say, I know exactly what you need, but then they're over there telling you, well, this is what I want.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes you have to shift and move that path a little bit.
It's such a weird thing. Now, one of the things you said that you do is you help to promote podcasts and to help grow an audience and make them bigger. And that's kind of, if you don't mind, that's what I want to focus down on for the next few minutes, because I think that's the big crux of it. Because when you're using a podcast like we were, you're really only interested in the person sitting across from you. Right. But as we venture out and as we grow, we found struggles, and we found some ways to beat it, and we found fun ways not to beat it, and everything else. But give us a little few-minute rundown of tips and tricks to help get your podcast promoted out there and grow your audience. Because if you're not saying you're using paid ads, that takes a big chunk of it out, right?
Yeah. And I love every strategy that's out there. Like if we would have started down the paid ads path, we might have gone that way. But we started where I came from, because as I mentioned, I had never done this before. This was it was probably about 8 years ago when I started with Pat, and he just asked me, like, can you grow a podcast? But I came from the world of content marketing, where I helped people write sales copy, web copy, email copy, whatever it was. So for me, my first approach was, what was I doing in the past that was working to bring traffic to business owners? Can I try that with a podcast? So this is one thing that still I share with people, because I sort of invented this way of growing because I had no other option. And what we did, the first thing we did was we actually started creating written content from our podcast. So we would take the show notes, the transcription, and we would take that and place it where our ideal dream client / listener was, where they were hanging out. And a lot of I'll give you an example. LinkedIn was one place, because we were selling real estate sales training to real estate agents and brokers and investors. So we would create like written content, and people are thinking, oh, I get it. You just put a link in there and send it to the podcast. No. But that's not what we did. What we actually did was we create a hook for the headline, a couple of curiosity driven sentences, and right underneath that, above the fold, we would take the embeddable podcast player, the code, and drop it right in. So we might say something like, Ryan was on the show where he shared 5 tips on how to white label your digital marketing agency. In the article here, we share 2 of them. If you want to listen to all of them, you just click the button right here and you can listen to the episode right here on the page. So we started doing that. And if you think about it, what we were doing is for lack of better terms, we were creating or claiming real estate all around the internet. So over time, as we did these articles with these players in them, we just planted seeds where we just had things everywhere all over the internet where our ideal clients were. Like we would actually think about, so we weren't just posting them anywhere. We were going, there was one place called Inman.com that is like one of the leading marketing content hubs for anything about professional growth when it comes to real estate agents. So we approached them and asked them, can we provide you some content, knowing that's where our perfect audience was hanging out, provided the content with the player right in there, and people could just listen right away and we could track it and see that our listeners were coming from these different locations. So that was the first thing that we did that was a little different than what pretty much anybody does. But what I like to share with everybody, if you think about it, it's like a set it and forget it strategy where we're creating something, it's evergreen, it lives out there. So 24/7, it is bringing our dream clients to us because we're actually going and putting it in front of them, being proactive versus just hoping they find it and show up at our podcast. So that was one way that we grew that was a little bit different.
Yeah, that basically what you're saying is make a dynamic blog post and put it where people can see it, because that is a very healthy way to just attract membership. Because the first tenet of marketing, as you know as a marketer, as I know marketers, know your audience. If you're selling real estate stuff, don't put it on a construction website. That's kind of 101. But you'd be amazed at people when they start promoting their podcast, they think that they need to put it everywhere, and you don't. You just need to dial down to who you're in this case, because you're trying to convert. But even if on a listener basis, you're just trying to grow listeners, you need to put it where that interest lies. And this is an amazing way to do it, because grabbing a transcript from your podcast is super easy now.
And the whole key, and eventually I had a writer, but coming from a writing background, I would create that hook of a headline, and I would create the little, for us, it wasn't even to get them to read the whole thing. It was like, okay, if we can pull them in with the headline and then get them to read that first paragraph, which basically was nothing but a roadmap that was like, here, push this button and listen to the episode. That's what we did. But we were, to your point, too, we focused on figuring out who that dream client was and being proactive about putting it in front of them, because we knew that we wanted to work with real estate agents who they believed in professional development. They believed investing in themselves and growing their skill level. So that's where we went to, locations that taught them like that and that provided that kind of information. And we would put our podcast in front of them there. And along with that was an evergreen model. The other one, which is pretty obvious, was guesting on other podcasts, but being very strategic about it, because I have a lot of people that I know and that I work with. They get so excited about being on shows that they just start going on anything and everything. And we have a limited time. So I'm like, let's be strategic about it. Let's figure out, once again, where is your dream client listener? Let's go on those shows. Let's make sure they're active. Let's make sure they're engaging. Let's make sure it's the right fit. But let's be strategic about your time and get on those shows, because as you know, too, a lot of times that opens up the door for another relationship that could be a potential JV opportunity, referral opportunity. So you don't want to just go get on anything and everything, much like you don't want to just throw your content everywhere and hope it attracts everybody, because you want to be strategic. But both of those for me, and when we did this, it was basically about 80% of these evergreen type strategies and 20% social media. We didn't do as much social media because we didn't have a lot of control over the visibility and the engagement, right? So we wanted to control it a little bit more, and we wanted to do things. Pat was he was retired. He's like, let's do things that are easy. Let's do things that create multiple wins. Do it once, win forever, versus the busy mode of social media. So that's why we pretty much stayed away. The only time we we focused on growing our podcast audience, was more retaining our audience, was creating a Facebook community, a Facebook group where we would move our audience members to, where they could get additional value and create sort of that next step in the relationship, right? From one-way communication in the podcast to the opportunity to do live trainings, to do Q&As. So there was more of a two-way relationship in that community. So that was another way that we were able to grow. But it was more, at that point, it was more about keeping your listeners. And if you, as you know, as you sort of fill up a glass with water, if you're keeping those listeners, eventually it's going to overflow. And at that point, you just got the ball rolling downhill, and you got listeners just coming in and coming in and coming in because you've kept your base by taking care of.
Oh, of course. And one of the things in podcast growth is that retention of listeners. And that seems to be a tricky thing as well, because as everybody knows, when you start, you're not as good as when you peak. And sometimes going through there, you're gonna get listeners, and you're gonna keep listeners, and you're gonna cycle some listeners. What are some of your retention, other than the Facebook thing? What are some of your methods that you've seen that help you retain and even retain your core audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one little, this was part of the Facebook group because we used it as our secret research lab. We would call it a lot of times, where we asked them a lot of questions and got a lot of their feedback, so we could build content based on what they wanted versus what we felt like they needed, right? We would get them to tell us what kind of content they wanted. So that was one way. The other way, we treated people like humans. We let them know that they were listened to, that they were acknowledged, and they were heard. And the way we did that was we would invite them to, give us reviews. We would read reviews on there. So we're acknowledging them. We'd read reviews on the podcast. We would ask them to send in questions. We'd ask for feedback, and we always addressed it. Even the bad feedback that we get, we would hit the nail on the head. We'd read it and be like, sorry, we sort of missed the mark on that. We appreciate you telling us. We're going to quit doing that.
That's
right?
a hard.
That was when we decided we started throwing like some ad, I guess you could call them ads. They were ads for our own products and services, like right in the middle of the conversations. And people were like, wait a minute, this is not the way the flow used to be. All of a sudden you're changing it up and interrupting it. They didn't like it. So we'd let them know, like, hey, we hear you. We're going to stop doing this. Thank you for letting us know. So when you do that, people are appreciated, and they end up sticking around.
I think it's a big
more.
win. I absolutely feel that way, because I don't really believe in bad feedback. I believe that all feedback has a purpose or a reason. Number one, to identify what you're doing right. Number two, what you're doing wrong. And number three, people you wouldn't want to meet in the supermarket. That's kind of what feedback lets me know, because there's some people that just gripe to be griping, and you get that. But if you get that feedback of if you get that, like several of your core members, and growing this podcast membership, you'll understand there's 4 or 5 members that you start to trust what they say a lot. And especially when you have Facebook groups and stuff like that. So definitely listening to your members is a wonderful technique to retain and help grow that audience, because when people see you doing that, they feel more of that community, and everybody likes that sense of community.
Yeah. And I would say too, I would say that the number, here's where I get on my high horse, at least with my clients. They're always like, you just pound us into the ground on this one. But for us, this is what changed our business. So this is why I always share it, because I see so many people missing out on this opportunity, is to get people on your list, right? Your owned traffic, OWNED. You own that traffic now. That's your list. And when we shifted we were basically struggling at one point to really get off of the feast or famine mode, the treadmill of like revenue, of getting sales. So we shifted from focusing on the sales to focusing on the next step, which was listener to lead. If we could get them in, give them an irresistible opt-in offer, create it less like a transaction, more like a relationship, and get them on that list, then we could communicate with them, and they look forward to hearing from us. because it was more give,
Yeah.
ask.
Right.
Right. So a lot of gives, a small ask every now and then. And that was a way to retain customers, listeners as well. But that's where our business switched to. And we basically went from 0 to $500,000 in revenue over a 12-month period by focusing on a relationship building style with our lead generation. But that retains listeners, and it helps get you a list that you can then rely on to be your best buyers and your best clients.
Oh yeah. On that, sorry, my window closed on me here. So let me just say, no, I'm still here. I'm still here. This is a wonderful thing about live podcasting. So let's move on because we're running close to the time allotted for these podcasts or whatever. You had mentioned before about guesting and building relationships. One of the things, just like you said, pound into the ground, that I want to bring to every one of these is how has podcasting affected you and your clients' networking and relationships?
Oh my gosh, that's huge. Just even me personally, the relationships that have been built, the networking, because I'm sure you've experienced this, but podcasting it's a very collaborative space. I run into people that they want to help you. They want to serve. They want to promote you. Like they'll ask you like, hey, are you looking to get on more shows? I know some people that I'd love to connect you with. Or one thing that I always try to do is think of my network and how they can be connected with others. So to me, the relationship part is just absolutely massive. It's gotten me connected with some really big names, successful people that I didn't realize I would ever, be able to be connected with, and been able to get me in rooms and masterminds with people. So it's not just me, it's my clients as well. But for me, the really the biggest thing I get out of it is because I get really excited when I meet other podcasters, other people who are out there just putting positive messages out into the world and just really stepping into their authentic self and shining that out there. So it creates this really amazing collaborative community. And it's not, we were actually joking about this the other day, is I used to absolutely hate in-person networking. Going to different, because I used to be in sales. I was in sales for radio, which oddly enough, I sold radio before I got into podcasting.
I'm an old DJ, yeah.
But, just business networking, where it just feels like all it is like, you feel like people are just, their most important thing is to get that business card in your hand, nothing else. When it comes to the podcast space, people are genuinely interested in connecting and building a real relationship. And often I feel like it comes from a place of serving first versus asking for something else. And I don't know if it's the podcast space in itself that's like that, but it really feels that way. It's very collaborative and very exciting, where people just want to help each other and want to help each other's businesses grow.
I absolutely agree with you. The thing that we found is it's like any other business networking group. We have people on the show, and it's the guy with the business card. All they want to do is talk about their business. All they want to do is whatever. But overwhelmingly, I wouldn't be sitting where I'm at, and we wouldn't have the business where we were at without these collaborative people that seen us come into space, that come in with effort and come in and like, hey, look, I've got 8 listeners. Are you still willing to be on my podcast while I get it off the ground? And everybody's like, yeah, let's go do it. Let's help bring this in. Alex from Podmatch, he's got a whole service, a whole whatever. And I messaged him, and he's like, yeah, let's talk. Let's do it. Our podcast network has 3 shows. He made the rounds. He went on all of them for us, and right.
I love it.
Wonderful guy. Wonderful.
Alex is a really cool. Yeah. He's like one of the coolest dudes out there too. So I'll throw him that. Oh,
absolutely. Because I brought him up on a couple things while we're talking about podcasts, and everybody says the same thing, how wonderful and just nice of a guy he is. They don't say the same things about me, but that's okay. We're not all Alex. I allow people to curse. Yeah,
I'm sure they do. I'm sure you get a lot of accolades out there too.
I let people curse on my show. I'm known for that. Like if you want to, I tell people in pre-interview, I don't think I said it to you. I'm like, you can curse, just don't turn it into a Quentin Tarantino movie. which is kind of odd, which is odd for a business podcast, right? To let people have that freedom or whatever. So, but yeah, the networking ability on podcasts is unmatched and unfathomable, because if you go to a BNI or a local networking group or whatever they are, you're structured by the people in your community. You're structured by people within driving distance. My third show I did was with a guy named Ferris Aranki, and it was about emotional intelligence in business. And he stayed up till 2:00 in the morning to meet with me because he's in London. Right? Like the time disparity. And then I interviewed a couple people from England and ended up building a relationship. We still message each other on LinkedIn to this day. Right. and to know and to get the support and find your people, because it's the same thing you do in the real world, right? Is you go out, you find your people, you collaborate, and you build. Podcasting opens that community up to worldwide.
Yeah. And for those, I don't know how many like new sort of entrepreneur business owners you have, but is there a better way to learn a lot of amazing wisdom and knowledge than having a podcast and inviting people on your show and they share things and you're just like, that's amazing. Now it's almost like it's your personal, you're getting coaching from different people. So that's another, and people with a podcast too, going back to the networking, it really does. It can open doors to almost anywhere, because you're serving somebody and giving them a platform to be able to share their message, right? So you can reach out to people. It doesn't I've got one of my clients and friends, he started his podcast by reaching out to people like Les Brown and the guy that wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. They never asked how many downloads you have or how many episodes you have. They just came on. They were gracious that he gave them a platform, and it opened up a whole new world for him. So it's the same thing, right? That people, if you approach it from, a place of service versus what can I get by bringing this person on my show, but like, how can I, it's like, hey, Ryan, I saw you have a book coming out in the next month. Well, you want to jump on my podcast and we can help promote your book, right? So it opens the doors to many possibilities and gives you the opportunity to really help people and serve them and grow your business.
Man, I got a funny story. I'm a video game nerd. Like I've been, since my little 5-year-old hands could play Mario, I've been in video games, right? And so I do this. Cash Miller, which is the owner of Titan Digital and business partner for Titan MediaWorks. I started playing a game, and I don't know if you're into video games. Starfield, if you live under a rock, but Starfield is this ginormous game that Bethesda Studios just put out, right? So I spent all weekend playing it. My wife and kids are like, Dad, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, video games, leave me alone. I'm playing this thing, right? Because it was opening weekend. So I log into LinkedIn, come in with a big old video game hangover on Monday morning. I log in and see my boss and one of the voice actors from Starfield talking how they know each other. And I'm like, you're shitting me, right? This is happening, right? So I fanboy out and I jump on that conversation. I'm like, Mr. Trey, you want to be on my podcast? Like, you want to come on my podcast with me and talk? And he accepted. He absolutely accepted. And like a week later, I'm interviewing. I'm playing like next to his character on the game, and then a week later, I've got him on my podcast. So. There's no reason to have him on a business podcast. I just wanted to talk to the guy, right? But the story, but it goes that we hit it off, and then the next week we talked a little bit more, and next week we're recording his first podcast in our production company. So right.
Cool.
So sometimes you take those leaps of faith, and you have people on just to talk to them. You have people on just because you want to, and you have a platform to talk to these people, and you end up doing business with them as well. So it's an amazing, it's absolutely an amazing platform for that.
And I think the way you approach it too, and in that situation, obviously it was organic. It wasn't. I've got a friend that runs a podcast, and she uses it to connect with business executives to get her books and training into their corporations. And she is so authentic. And so the spotlight is all on them. There's no sales. I mean, she walked me through her process, and I was just like, that's amazing. This is like, it's so personable, and it's all about the other person, that it's amazing. The reciprocity kicks in to where they just automatically ask, like, well, how can I help you? And then they have a discussion, right? And it's helped her grow her business, but it was never an intentional like sales presentation through the podcast. It was much like what you shared, just bring them on, have a great conversation, get to know the person, and just let it create its own rhythm from there.
We talked for over an hour. Me and Trey talked for over an hour, and I'll just do it right now. So after a while, I realized it wasn't very businessy. And once again, we're doing podcasts together or whatever. I just turned my branding off and we talked. I'm just like, all right, so there's no more branding. We're going to talk. We talked about barbecue. We talked about where we lived. We talked about voice acting, how we got into it, just life stories. And it was an amazing show. I don't know what I'm going to do with that recording, by the way. It's not here, but it could be somewhere else or whatever. And it could be an introduction to there. I always love going on people's podcasts because I guest a lot. That it is that they're there to serve and they're there to do that, and that's what I want this show to do. So with that said, Evans, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your knowledge about podcasts. And what I would like for you to do is tell us all your links, where to find you, where to hook up with you, where to get your services. Give us the rundown of how we get a hold of Evans after this.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I had to jump over and grab this off my desk. So, I talk about all the time, build your list, build your list, build your list. So what I generally just tell people to do is I created something I call the listeners to leads blueprint. So you can actually move people from listeners to leads. So I'd love to give them that. Just send them to go check that out, and they can go to they can get it by texting the word leads to 55444. Okay. That's leads to 55444. So that's the best way to get that gift. And if they want to find out more about me, happy to have them come over and just find me on LinkedIn or on Facebook. Just look for Evans Putman, Evans Putman, and reach out anytime. I'm happy to jump on, and I believe in, getting on calls with people and serving them, giving them some insight and not just pitching them. I just like to connect and meet people. So I'd love to connect with any of your listeners, but go grab that download because it's a powerful way to shift people from your podcast to get them on your list so you can continue the relationship. Absolutely.
Once again, thank you so much for your time today. This broadcast is brought to you by Titan MediaWorks. I would love to give you a logo and a website, but we're brand new and I don't have any of that. So stay tuned for that. They also pay me to do this. So if you are interested in podcast production, if you've been wanting a podcast and wanting to get it off the ground, don't understand how to do all the production or don't want to take the time to do all the production, that's what people like me are for, because we're weird and we like to do that. So we leave it to all the fun parts of the podcast where you get to go do the thing into the microphone and we make you look good and get you distributed after that. So Ryan at Titan Digital, if you're interested in that, once again, thank you Titan MediaWorks for sponsoring this show. And until next time, this has been Small Business Chronicles.